My name is Joseph Patel. I'm a filmmaker based in Brooklyn. Um, my hometown is a town called Fremont, California, which is also the hometown of our guest today, Sid Sriram. Give him a hand. I'm older than you, so we didn't grow up in the same time, but
But same suburban experience.
same
though,
suburban experience.
for sure.
Before we start, I just want to do two acknowledgments real quick. One is just want to give props to Sole for year 12 on the festival. I've been coming here since 2019. It is hands down one of the best experiences I've had for a music festival. I think they do things very, very well, very thoughtfully. So it's an honor for me to be here. The second acknowledgement I want to do, if anybody saw yesterday's talk, is I did the same thing, which is there's someone who's not here this year who has been a part of my Soul experience and has been a part of the Soul family for a long time. His name is DJ Clark Kent. He sadly passed away a few months ago. It's weird being here and not seeing him around, so I just want to acknowledge his passing and before we kick everything off. So Sid.
How's it going, man?
Good. How are you?
I'm
so
good.
in prepping for this talk, we were talking on the phone, and I said we're just going to be one of our phone conversations, but just on stage. I do want to start though a little bit at the beginning because it leads to something later I want to ask you about. So, how did you start singing? When did you know this is something that was part of you?
So I started really early on. I come from a family of Carnatic musicians, which is an age-old tradition from southern India. I was born in Chennai, India in 1990. We moved to Fremont in 91. And my mom started a Carnatic music school, vocal music institution in Fremont in 92. So it was really around me from as far back as I can remember. And I think we have like karmic hangovers, you know what I mean? And certain things that are passed on to us from previous lives. So I feel like music was pretty deeply embedded in my spirit from whatever happened before, you know? And I was blessed to be born into a family where I had this music that was like so entrenched in our everyday life. And I just took to it immediately. My mother and father kind of recognized that I had this affinity towards music and melody specifically. And I started singing when I was 3. That's when my mom initiated me into like lessons. And more than like formal, like Western based, like learning, it was more just imbibing what was going on around me and really just letting it like photosynthetically kind of like enter my system. And I performed on stage for the first time when I was 3. And since then, it's just been a deep, integral element of my life and my breathing and everything, really. And I think consciously, I was aware of this by the time I was like 7 or 8. I was like, oh, this is something special that exists within myself. It is my way of relating to the world around me when language or other forms of communication aren't necessarily clicking. This is one thing where I was like, oh, I can tap into this and express and also feel resonances with people around me through this beautiful thing that's music and melody and vocalizing.
You said you were 7 or 8 when that sort of clicked for you.
Yeah, I think very much in line with immigrant families in the States. My mom had me singing in front of everyone. When we'd have guests come over, when we go to people's houses for gatherings, and I would never, I wasn't the type that was reluctant. I was so down because I loved it so much. But I would have these certain moments in those early days of performing for people in intimate environments where I could see the way someone would molecularly change when I sang. And it was beyond the ego. It was beyond feeling satisfied with attention, which was also something that would happen for sure. But deeper than that, there were these moments where I could just see someone's posture ease up or someone tear up. And when I saw that start happening, I was like, oh, I understood purpose pretty early on, I feel like. And before I could intellectually like articulate that, I could feel it in my gut. And that was around, I would say, like 7 or 8. And then from that point, it was just finding every opportunity to dive deeper into those resonances and really make sense of it, you know. And I think Carnatic music is also the music, the lyric is all based on either like Hindu text or Hindu mythology. So there's an inbuilt kind of connection to spirituality within the music form. So it also became my first kind of pathway and portal to understand my relationship to God and the divine.
Yeah, and it's interesting how you describe it as a feeling, because that is the thing we understand when we're younger, before
Yeah.
the intellect catches up.
For sure.
When did the intellect catch up? Because having an affinity and relation to music is one thing, and pursuing it as a sort of like your life's pursuit is
Yeah.
a different thing, right? Like what was it that sort of clicked for you where you're like, oh, I actually think I should give this a shot? Because you went to the Berklee College of Music,
Yeah,
and that's a huge decision.
for sure. I think first and foremost, I think music, I don't know, man, growing up in Fremont, growing up in the suburbs, even though when I was growing up there was a lot of South Asian people, a lot of Southeast Asian people. So it didn't necessarily feel like I stuck out like visually or like the optics of it. But I always felt very different from those around me. So music was first the thing that made me feel a sense of belonging, you know? And so before I thought about like what I was going to do professionally, what my life's path was going to be, uh this thing, I mean, every year there'd be like a talent show, you know what I mean? And like that was like my time to be like, yo, this is who I am and feel accepted. Um and I think that feeling just kind of drove me in a way, because obviously there is like the spirit and the divine and the pursuit in that way, but also just growing up as kids, you there's a need for validation, which is common across anyone anywhere in the world. So this was my way of feeling validated, and I chased that for a while, and that's what kind of led me to, oh, I think I can do this professionally. Um, and that was more of like an ego based pursuit for sure. And I think that that's what led me to be like, what am I going to do? Not beyond money, beyond anything else. What was I going to give my energy to, and how could I find my place in the world? And that was music, and that intellectually clicked when I was in like 8th or 9th grade. I had a cousin who told me about Berklee College of Music, and I was okay academically, you know. And was it the same for you growing up in the Bay or in Fremont? Was it academically very rigorous when you were growing up over there? So that was what it was for me, where everyone was overachieving like crazy, trying to get into every Ivy League college.
Gate classes.
Fucking gate, man. Yeah, all of that, you know. And it was, and I did okay, but I just knew that wasn't. I didn't fit into that tapestry at all. So once I discovered that Berklee College of Music existed, I was like, oh, I could do that, you know. And I knew that I still didn't know how I'd make a profession of it, you know. But if it's an academic institution that focused on music, I knew that for 4 years after I was out of high school, I would have a place to be and then figure it out. So I applied, I got in there, I got into UCLA for ethnomusicology, and my folks were actually the ones that pushed me to go to Berklee, where they're like, yo, if you're going to do this, you got to really do it.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how supportive were your parents of going to Berklee, this College of Music?
I mean, they were, I really faltered with the decision, because all my homies were going to UCLA or like some college in California. And, you know, you want to be amidst people that you know, and I didn't necessarily want to travel across the country. But they, again, were the ones that really drove home this point of, if you're going to pursue something that you have a passion for and a talent for, you know, and you're put on this earth to do that, then dive all the way in and commit to it. And I was still kind of, you know, on the fence. And then I visited Boston. I visited the college, and the East Coast specifically just stole my heart immediately. Like the buildings, the Charles River over there. I felt, you know, you get that feeling in your gut sometimes where everything feels like it's glowing. I felt that as soon as we landed, we were driving over for my interview. And And from that point, I applied early decision. I got accepted, jumped around the house. I was super hyped, and that's what I did. And that institution is responsible for so much of what shaped the way I view music. I listened to music. Up until that point, I just knew that I was a dude that had a crazy voice, and could really sing the shit out of a song. But I didn't know what went into making records. I didn't know what songwriting was about. And my experience was so limited to the microcosm that I grew up in, that I didn't have exposure to so much of the world, whether that be different cultures, people from different backgrounds, different forms of music, all these things. And when I got exposed to that over there, when I started college in Boston, my soul just, it just blew up in the most beautiful way, where I feel like, one, for the first time, I was amidst people who spoke my language. And I was provided with a plethora of information that just got me so excited and was like fuel. When you know you don't know something and you start to acquire more information, especially when it's something you're passionate about, your whole world opens up. And that's what really happened to me once I started there.
So even before you went to college, you're singing Carnatic music.
Yeah.
But what are you listening to?
So I grew up listening to soul music, Luther Vandross, Stevie Wonder, Aretha Franklin. I found that actually by watching American Idol, just watching them cover them joints, and then I'd look it up, be on LimeWire, just trying to find like, what are these songs, where do they come from? So a lot of it was soul music. As I got a little bit older, hip hop, whatever was on the radio. When I was a kid, my favorite song was Drops of Jupiter by Train. You know what I mean? So definitely like mainstream shit, but then also finding my own little pockets and niches. And once I got into like ninth grade, I started buying my own CDs, and that was everything from like jazz records like Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin. My sister did a summer at Brown and came back probably after having smoked weed for the first time, and she just like put me on to a whole bunch of incredible music. Was obsessed with specific albums, I would say. Miseducation of Lauryn Hill was something I rinsed. And it was really cool because, you're entrenched in a traditional form like Carnatic music, and I was performing on stage since the age of like 10, full concerts. So there was that going, but then I had this other parallel track of just imbibing all these different forms of music. And early on, the seeds were starting to get sown of, these are very different forms. Whereas Carnatic music has like, it's called a gamaka, which is an embellishment, which sounds like, is like an example. And then, but soul music had, it's like, still like a way the voice moves, but very different. But that was my bridge. I was like, I love doing this, the ornamentation in Carnatic music. So what is this in R&B soul that someone like Luther is just like, sounds like butter, And finding those bridges early on is also what made me feel like I had a place in the West. Because up until then, I was listening to Carnatic music, I was listening to A.R. Rahman at the house, and then obviously the music that was always just going on from classes that my mom had. But when I found these forms of music, I was like, I can figure that out, and I started just digging into it.
Yeah, because it's like, especially the immigrant experience in America, you get used to living your life in two different
Sure. Isolation.
Yeah, and so like,
Sure.
I imagine the music you're listening to, you sort of kept in two different buckets.
Yeah.
It's really cool to hear you describe the sort of lightning bolt moment where you start to notice the similarities.
For sure. And like, it's a very isolating feeling of growing up in a place that's far from your roots and your mother tongue, and having a very specific cultural experience within the house. But then when you're at school and whatnot, it being vastly different from that. So that lightning, that spark, once that happened, it was a very internal thing. And it was a realization that happened completely internally. And I couldn't really externalize it because not many people around me understood. But in my mind, I had this little secret where I was like, oh, I have this different way I can view the world and move around. And I'll always have this within myself. And that just continued to grow. It started off as like a very young tree, and then it just started to grow branches as I got older, for sure.
One of the things I really love and respect about you as we've become friends is your curiosity.
Mm.
And when hearing you describe Berkeley, your experience at Berkeley, how much does your own curiosity drive what you did then, and who you performed with, or what you learned, and also how it drives you now?
Sure. I think curiosity requires like a certain level of fearlessness. And I would say that I really, really came into that when I got a bit older in the last 5 to 6 years. When I was younger, what drove me more than anything else was just trying to understand where I fit in the world. So it wasn't as much asking questions. It was just like, I don't know where my place is and I need to figure it out just for my own sanity, you know? But so what started off as a way of, like I said before, trying to find validation or trying to find a way to assert my presence in the world, that slowly over the years evolved, the rigor of that. Because with any form of music, especially a classical form, there's a certain level of just daily rigor of work you got to put into it. So the work that I put into finding out what my place in the world by way of music, you do that every day, and slowly you find out like you don't need to assert anything. That's not what the human experience is about. It's not about controlling shit. It's not about trying to claim your corner of the earth. Rather, especially by way of music, is just about asking questions. And as I got older, the need to validate, the need to let people know, yo, I'm really fire at what I do, or whatever, that dissipated. And what took the place of that was questions of like, oh, this is the first time I just tried to sing like ragas against chords. It was just like a universe opened up in my brain. And that just led to more questions like, what is harmony? How does harmony work in the context of jazz or in the context of Western classical music? And then when I take my tradition, and Indian music is linear, there are no chords. But when I take that and juxtapose it, what is born out of that? So just questions, we got more questions, and soon I was just in this process of wanting to learn every second I got. And, also the realization that music is a manifestation of the universe and that thereby it's infinite. So then I also got very comfortable with the fact that every day, no matter how much I progress career-wise, how much I achieve, I'm going to be at the very beginning of my relationship with music. As these kind of principles really made their way into my subconscious, the questions just got bigger, more exciting, and I feel like that's where I'm at right now, where I just want to know more. I want to try shit out. I want to throw paint on the wall as much as I possibly can, and see what comes of that. Because sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes the experiments they sound corny or something, but sometimes they click, and when they click, it's you feel like you've gotten like some sort of transmission from God, and that I think is how I've really understood my purpose now, for sure.
So without going into sort of the career chronology,
Yeah.
one of the things that's really interesting is you, when you first started making music as an artist, you were doing this sort of crossover thing. And then I think that's the first time we met. You had sent me some Frank Ocean cover you did and a couple other songs that you had done.
Yeah.
And I really loved your voice, but also, and I loved the way you interpreted those songs. And then you sort of went away for a little bit, and and then we reconnected.
Yeah.
And you were this like global star.
Yeah.
When you went back to India, how did you get into the South Indian film world? And was that a realization of the dream that you always had of your career?
Not at all. Like I was pretty hell bent on making a career for myself in the West, and writing my own songs and becoming famous off of that, and still very much so. Even though there's so much spirituality tied into my pursuit with music, consciously until when I was like in college and all that, I still really badly just wanted to be famous. You know what I mean? That was still at the very core of my pursuit, and I kept hitting walls with that. You know, I had a couple moments like the Frank Ocean cover from 2011 that really translated, which again kind of happened by accident. But when I was pursuing this kind of fame or celebrity, or again making sure people knew how ill I was, that shit did not translate at all. The film stuff happened by accident. So A.R. Rahman won his Oscar for Slumdog Millionaire in 2010. That was my sophomore year at Berkeley. I had just gotten back home from like a party or something. I was in college, and I feel like my folks started asking me about what my career path was going to be, and if they weren't explicitly asking me, I could kind of feel that energy. So I shot him an email, a cold email that night when I got back, just sending him some of my music, and never in a million years expected anything back. But he responded like 10 days after that. And he was really interested in this confluence of the East and the West that existed within my music. And completely serendipitously, I got a chance to work with him for the first time in 2012, right as I was graduating college. And again, I really, you know, there's a certain level of self-hate that is inbuilt, I would say, into any immigrant's experience, just by way of the fact that you don't see anyone that looks like you that's doing the really cool shit, you know? And we're relegated to a very, very, very thin sliver of an experience and what is expected of you, or what is even allowed, what you're allowed to dream about. And these are very subliminal things. But when I saw him win the Oscar, and he's from Chennai, he speaks Tamil, which is my language, something clicked. And I had my song come out with him in a Tamil film in 2012. I had one more come out in 2015. And my career was kind of moving, but I was still kind of reluctant to fully lean into that. I was like, no, I'm going to live in LA, couch surf, and try to get my career off the ground here. So that was still at the core of what I was trying to do. But my father, who manages me, I had a song come out in 2016, again in Tamil with AR, and that blew up. And I was still reluctant to move to India or spend more than the 2 months that I would spend there on vacation or whatever. But my father was like, yo, let's go see what's going on there. Kind of went there kicking and screaming. And we got there and my life changed. My career just skyrocketed. And what happened, like, more importantly than any of like the financial gains or again the acknowledgement that I was getting, was for the first time I formed my own relationship with my motherland. Living there, having my own experience, meeting my own set of friends, just really building a life and an ecosystem in the country allowed me to root myself in a way that never existed before for me. My vision, my perspective on India was always through the lens of my folks. And when I got to build my own relationship, it transformed so much within myself. And I started to understand who I was for the first time. And another thing that happened is I got famous off of that. This thing that I'd pursued since, again, watching American Idol when I was like in 4th grade or whatever, it happened. And I loved it for the first year. And then I realized that there's a lot of baggage that comes with that. So then I was able to come back to the original source of what made music so special to me, which was the connection to God. And when I came back to that, and it couldn't have happened anywhere else outside of India for me specifically, because there's something that's pulsing through that country, Chennai specifically, that just opened up spaces for me to really connect with my spirituality in a way that did not feel performative, in a way that did not feel like I was adopting it from those before me, but it became my own relationship. And once that relationship really strengthened and bolstered and became a part of the depths of my spirit, I came back to music in a way that felt so refreshed and renewed, and also honest. You know, the need to kind of act a certain way, just, you know, it dissolved. And I was able to start learning who I was and really just be that person to the best of my ability 100% of the time.
And did that sort of transformation and sort of recalibration of your relationship to music and why you did it, is that sort of what fueled your desire to go back to merging East and West but this time with like more honest parameters.
I think for sure it what it did at first, it brought me back to Carnatic music in a way, because I'd kind of gotten disillusioned with that form. It's such a complex form, highly improvised, these parameters that you exist within, and you have to find musical liberation within these boundaries. And it felt like I was just like smacked up against a glacier, and I couldn't see it. I couldn't get a perspective. But what this relationship or renewed relationship with self did, it brought me back to Carnatic music in a way where, again, I wasn't practicing it because I was trying to achieve something, but I was just interested in breaking this form down. As I did that and broke it down to its building blocks, I had a new vocabulary that I could approach bridging my worlds with. Instead of just doing it by throwing darts in the dark, I had a new formed language, a new formed vocabulary, and just approach where I could really kind of methodically figure out, okay, if I want to take these very different worlds and bring them together, how am I going to do it? I had the ability to kind of not just wade into deep waters and just pray and hope I didn't sink, but I had the tools. And that started around, I want to say 2017, 18, and 2020, the pandemic hit. 2020 is also like 2019 was the height, or rather the busiest I'd ever been up until that point in my life. Pandemic hit. I came back to California, to the Bay, to lock down with my parents. And the pandemic is when I really started to have the aha moments of, one, that my identity wasn't siloed, and that I wasn't American sometimes and Indian sometimes, and that I was just one human being with a beautifully kaleidoscopic experience, and that my music had to be a manifestation and representation of that. Obviously, the pandemic started with life being weird and waking up and staring at the ceiling for like an hour before getting out of bed.
In your parents' house.
Yeah, exactly. And right before, we were supposed to do a whole world tour and everything that year. So everything shifted, but staring at the ceiling slowly turned into questions again, and sitting at my laptop and just making, we didn't know whether we were going to be back in the world again. You know what I mean? So I was just making music again from the perspective, I just need to do this shit to stay sane. And that led to questions, and the curiosity just came bubbling up. Not even, but it was like a waterfall. And that's when it was like another renaissance of self, like similar to the one that I had when I first moved to India. This was just like the phase 2 of that, where I understood again that who I was so many different things. And I didn't have to just code switch and highlight one thing when I was in one room and highlight another thing, but I could really find a way to tap into this river of self and have that all kind of shine through all the music that I did.
I mean, it sounds funny that deep into your career, but it's like finding your voice.
Hell yeah.
Your true voice.
Yeah, for sure. I think like up until then, I would always just feel, I'd cringe a little bit when I heard my music, just a little bit. And I knew, again, that I sounded really good, and I knew that technically I'd found vocal prowess. But everything from lyrically to my melodic decisions, like the very subtle things, they would just make me kind of just like jump back a tad bit. And during that time, I lived with those feelings, and I just allowed myself to sit with them, and I found my voice, for sure.
So in the last couple of years, I've noticed... So you have your touring band, and you went on tour with Bon Iver a few years ago.
Yeah, 2 years ago.
I saw you in Brooklyn when you had the residency at Pioneer Works, and you were working by yourself.
Yeah.
And with a small group of musicians.
Yeah.
You recently played the Blue Note in New York with jazz musicians.
Yeah.
You're working on a new album with Mike Will Made It, a hip hop producer.
Yeah.
It feels to me, and I guess the question I have for you is, how much a part of being uncomfortable drives your creativity? Because it seems like you willingly put yourself in these situations that are uncomfortable. You don't have an experience doing it, but you're willingly doing this. How much of that drives your own creativity?
Everything. It's absolutely everything. I feel like I don't like I don't want to skydive, or I don't want to do none of that, but this is my adrenaline rush. You know what I mean? Like, I get to just dive into these deep ends that I would never have imagined myself being in. For example, me and Mike working together in Atlanta. My last album was made in Minneapolis. Justin Vernon of Bon Iver was integral in that process, and that was me jumping into a deep end in and of itself. And it was a very specific thing that we created. Right after that, me and Mike getting together and starting to work was a process that I've never experienced before in a city that I'd never really been to, and aesthetically, two different worlds that I'd never really put next to each other. But it's and the music is like I was telling you before, like 70% there. But very early on, we realized that there's like a spark in it, and I think as an artist, first and foremost, my biggest kind of MO is to heal by way of music. The second thing that's very close second is to create for experiences that feel like they've never existed before. Partially, very selfishly, because I know that there's so much that I want to explore and that I can do. So I want to do as much of that while I'm here on this earth. But less selfishly, I feel like those pieces of music and sonic universes, they can inspire something in someone at some corner of the world, just really be like, I would never have thought of this and that together, and it sparks something. But the being uncomfortable, I think, is a cornerstone to artistry, because that's when you start to just discover more. Music is such a strange mystery. You know, the fact that notes and drums and chords and melodies and different sonics can all come together in this very mysterious symphony of sound and have such a profound impact on people, to me, will always be the most beautiful thing to exist in the world, right next to love. And getting to put myself in these positions where I'm terrified, you know, for example, the Blue Note, I got to play with Kenny Garrett, who's like jazz OG, was one of the last living members of Miles Davis's band, and he's really about it. And we got on stage that night, and I was terrified. You know, you get this feeling in your gut where everything feels like it's sinking. That's how I felt right as I got on stage, and very quickly that feeling kinetically turned into something really special, you know, in sonic form. And the pursuit to understand the world by way of music, I'm so grateful that I've been put in this position, because I believe that there's no better way to understand the world but through music. It just makes things click, and it comes back to the curiosity. You know, I think, and the humility in that, because I don't want to just do the shit I'm good at all the time. I want to sharpen the sword, and I want to learn. And these experiences being in, and also like you meet such different people. Like one day getting to be with Mike and his guys in Atlanta, and then flying to New York and being with these heavy jazz heads, and then going to Chennai and being on stage with some Carnatic music giants, some of these guys are like 90 years old, still killing it, you know. But I get transmitted such incredible information in these situations. That's really shaped who I am as a human being. It's kept me young. It's kept me.
You're already young.
I don't know, man. I'm 34 now, so I'm starting to feel like I can't quite claim youth the same way I could 10 years ago. But I feel like I'm 21. You know what I mean? And I only feel that way because of the fact that this relationship and journey with music has just kept me asking questions, kept me learning, and there's no better way to stay young than to just ask questions constantly and just learn.
I think part of my personal respect for you is you could have just stayed in Chennai and been a South Indian music star.
Yeah.
And you know, you put yourself in this situation where you're like, no, there's something else I'm aspiring to. And I have a great amount of respect for that.
Love.
In those situations where you've been, you know, put yourself in an uncomfortable situation, been terrified, has there been an instance of that where it hasn't worked? And what lesson might you have learned from that?
I think every time I've entered a situation that makes me feel truly scared, the biggest thing that's involved in that is surrender. And every time I've surrendered, it hasn't not worked out. Like anytime I surrender to the Almighty, the universe, the people who really know their shit, you know what I mean? And I surrender to the moment, there's not been, and I mean, like, can I get better? Of course, that's always going to happen. But when surrender is involved, something has sparked, and that has led to something else, that's led to something else. And I don't mean even by way of like aspirational career shit. I just mean this path of learning more, and it's always sparked something. For example, I spent a month in Pioneer Works, which is this really cool art space in Brooklyn, and I did a artist in residence thing there, which you came and checked out what I was working on. That music is like this 21-minute piece that may never see the light of day. It might only exist on my laptop. So like, I could chalk that up to like it didn't work out, but what was born out of that month, so much of what I'm doing now was like the initial spark was from May of 2023 when I was posted up over there. You know what I mean? So, and I've also learned to not chalk up life to failure or success, because there's been times where I've been on paper so successful and felt horrible within myself. And so many of these quote unquote failures, for example, I was younger, sounds pretentious, but I was like a prodigy with music, yeah? And everyone around me expected me to just pursue Carnatic music alone and become this like masterful musician by the age of 12, let's say. That did not happen. And I'm so fucking grateful for that, because it just pushed me to keep knowing more and broadening my perspective. So that's what I've come to most recently, is just not even look at life as success or failure. Also getting super micro about it. A lot of the music that I perform is super improvised, whether that's the Carnatic music or when I'm doing the jazz-based stuff. And what I've realized in those moments is it requires hyper presence. And the minute you pat yourself on the back for something that sounded ill, you fall off the balance. Or the minute you question yourself, you fall off. So instead of looking at this stuff as like, oh, I'm doing great or I suck, I'm just trying to be as present as possible, find that center, and feel very comfortable in the fear that, yeah, you could fall this way or that, but if I can just, put one foot in front of the other and focus on what's going on in the moment, blessings, answers, music, love, all that stuff is going to keep coming my way.
Something will come out of it.
For sure.
The other thing too, I think, something I empathize with is the work ethic, right? Because I think people, and I think this is applicable to any creative pursuit, is you have to do the work. You have to put in the work. And, especially someone who's been told since a young age that they're very talented.
Yeah.
What is your work ethic like, and what keeps you on that path? Is it the relationship with this sort of divine thing that you feel like you owe yourself to?
Yeah, I think when I was younger, I didn't have it. Pops was staying on me about staying on it. And then it really happened when I refound my relationship with Carnatic music, where I just wanted to know more and I wanted to make sense of so much of the stuff that was confusing me. It naturally put me down this path of the daily rigor of just getting up in the morning, voice exercises for an hour, practicing for 2 hours later on in the day. And at first it was really difficult. The same way, like I just got into boxing a couple years ago, and like going to the gym every morning and making sure I'm at it sometimes is really difficult. But once I made routine of that over and over and over, the joy was no longer in the accolades, but just getting to get up and do the thing. So I think the work ethic comes from, again, being related or being immersed in this form that requires it. And then once I really just tapped into that, that's the joy. Every day I get to sing. I turn on, we call it Shudli Box, but it's our drone. I turn that on and I just get to explore and refine my craft And also a really cool thing about working hard is that you can over a period of time feel yourself getting better at something. And there's very little things that are as satisfying as, like, for me vocally, I feel a different sense of control now than I did 2 years ago or 5 years ago. Uh, and those moments of feeling that, like, I've come on this, like, so every December in Chennai, it's called the Madhgari season, and it's like a month of hundreds of Carnatic concerts across the city. I've been performing there since I was like 9 or 10. This year, somewhere during the year, I found this new vocal approach where I can, like, open my mouth a certain way and the air flows from my gut through my body out so much more effortlessly than it ever has before. And I don't know at what point that shit happened, but it happened and that only came from just like being at it every day, you know? And that's what it is. That's how I find that's like joy for me, you know? And also it's allowed me, I feel like a true relationship with the divine is not easy. You know, it takes work. And that's also something that it took me a while to understand. I almost felt entitled to God's ear, and that's just not how it works.
You gotta earn it.
Hell yeah. And my relationship with music is what gave me that realization, and I'm so grateful for that. Because the amount of peace that comes from the fact that we do not control shit, you know what I mean? And that there is a higher being that maybe doesn't spell out every step, but grace exists in the world, you know, and understanding grace, and understanding the divine, that's not even joy. That's just something I can't even put into words, but that's 100% come through just working at music every day.
I want to go back to when you were talking about performing at the Blue Note and meeting Kenny Garrett. And
Yeah.
Did you know him before?
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I got into jazz when I was in college. It was one of the genres that was exposed to me. And I listened to jazz before. Like, I had a couple of Joe Lovano CDs, some, like I was saying before, big band, Duke Ellington stuff. Definitely didn't understand the music, but was just trying to be like the cool kid in high school that was like a divergent, you know what I mean? And but when I was in college, that's when I really started to understand, I guess, like the core of jazz. And so that's when I got introduced to Kenny Garrett's music, and have been a fan since then, really listening to a lot of his records, not being hyper familiar with like the deep cuts, but I knew. And then we were putting together the band for the Blue Note, and Alex Kurland, who books at the Blue Note, hit me being like, yo, what do you think about Kenny Garrett guesting with you for night 2? I was like, hell yeah. And again, the first thing I felt when he said that was fear. Because the worst thing to do is be on stage and look like an idiot. Because you're going to be on there for an hour and a half. And the minute you're shown to like not have the chops to keep up with it, it's a long hour and a half, you know what I mean? But so I was scared, but it also, again, pushed me to start digging into a different bag that I didn't really know that I had before. But what I started doing was, there's a jazz standard called, or it's Wayne Shorter's Footprints, and it's been one of my favorite songs for a long time. But in Carnatic music, our solfege is called swadam. So I took Footprints, converted it into swadam. So the melody is da la la da 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 da. So I converted that to ni 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 sa da ni da pa ma ri sa ni 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 sa ri ga ri sa ni pa ma ni da pa ma ri ma sa, which falls under a certain raga in Carnatic music, which is sa ri ma pa ni sa ni pa ma ri sa. And that only happened because I knew, like, if I was going to play with Kenny, I can't just do like pop songs, or nothing against pop. I love pop. I make a lot of it. But if I was going to hang with one of the dudes, I really wanted to hang. So doing that kind of conversion from jazz into Carnatic, and opening up that world, that opened up a whole new dimension. Which, again, at the age of like 33, 34, after having done this for just over a decade, I was starting to feel like, I wonder if there is a lot more to discover, you know? And this just reinvigorated that in a way that it opened up an entirely new universe. And like I said, I'd been a fan of his work. With a lot of OGs, you don't know if they're gonna be kind or if they're gonna come and little bro you.
Yeah, I imagine when you are performing with someone like him, or even like with Mike Will made it.
Yeah.
Like I imagine they're also opening up, hearing you.
Well, what happened with Kenny was he wasn't really hip to Carnatic music like that. So we started having conversations leading up to the residency there, and he was asking so many incredible questions. And he was so damn curious. He was finding random links of Carnatic music on YouTube and sending me them. And, yo, what's this? Yo, what's that? And we were in the dressing room leading up to the show on the day of, and he was like finding new shit to ask me about. I was like, bro, like I got to get like 15 minutes of sleep in, but I have like a routine. He was asking so many questions, and this is like a legend. You know what I mean? And that's when it just reaffirmed, or more strongly affirmed to me, the fact that no matter how much you've done, how much you've kind of like cemented your name in the world as an artist, the ones that continue to flourish are the ones that continue to ask and the ones that want to know more. So I was coming at it trying to learn more about the jazz discipline and understanding how you improvise in that context. He was understanding what I was doing. And what happened was all those questions leading up to when we were on stage, man, we had conversation by way of music when we were improvising. Like I was tearing up on stage because it felt like two humans without any words talking to each other. And a lot of times when you improvise, call and response, the other person will just mimic what you've done and it turns into that. What he was doing, I would play a phrase, then he would build on that phrase and I would build on that. And you built a sonic like castle damn near, man. And it was, yeah, and this happened what, like a few months ago now in October, and I haven't stopped buzzing from it since. It just it's I feel very grateful that I get these opportunities to, one, take information from other individuals and also impart information. And I think thereby change the way that they view the world. And again, same goes for me. Especially the times that we're in. I feel like that shit has the power to save humanity in a way, you know? And I've heard some people say that, you know, it's just music. It's not that serious. And I've heard this from people I deeply respect even. And I always kind of sit there and be like, nah, it is. It is. Like, sound is just so profoundly powerful. And what it can do to people, what it can do to alleviate pain, to change someone's perspective, and to really, like, I don't know how you feel about good and evil, but I feel like those things are all mixed in to all of us. And sound has this ability to, like, really flip the way someone approaches the world. So it is most certainly that serious. And again, that was just time and again throughout my life, it's been reaffirmed. And this current phase I'm in, I've had at least a few moments in the last few months that have just, you know, just made me feel that with a certain vigor that I think I've never necessarily felt before in my life.
Well, we have a few minutes, so I want to sort of end on this. I've heard you speak about mental health before.
Yeah.
And I think it's an important consideration for any creative.
Sure.
You travel a lot, and you put yourself in these situations we've just been talking about, where you're sort of surrendering to the situation and the environment, and it's a form of vulnerability.
Sure.
How are you able to sort of maintain your mental health with all the travel, with all those creative situations where you're vulnerable?
Yeah.
And really framing it as a lesson for other people to learn from. Like, how do you maintain that mental health?
It's a good question, man. I mean, like, it's a strange pursuit because you're cutting yourself open every day and bearing yourself to the world and your soul to the world. And there's a great adrenaline rush that comes from that. Like, being on stage, the high that I feel is unmatched. But then you come down off of that. And I think the first thing that I've learned is just how to peacefully let myself find ground again, you know? And that's just come from, again, doing the work of figuring it out. Do I need to watch an episode of The Office when I get off stage and get back to the hotel room? You know what I mean? Do I have to jump on the phone with my mom or dad? Just finding these tools that are going to allow me to reconnect with myself. That's one. Two, I don't subscribe to this idea that like me on stage or me as an artist and me as a human are two separate things. It's just all one thing. And for me, that really, really helps because I couldn't imagine what it would feel like to have to switch into a persona and then switch back. I think that would really mess with my head. So I've made sure that my artistic pursuit is a deeply human pursuit, you know, and it's also my way of finding peace and understanding the world. So I think that has helped. But I think beyond anything else, keeping good people around me that are honest with me. My family, my father, he's here today. He manages me. My mom is still my guru to this day. My sister's a mentor. And we stay close. And they don't pull punches with me. You know what I mean? If I'm being whack about something, they call me out. If I've done a good job, if they're excited about something, they don't necessarily say they're proud because there's still so much more that collectively we want to do. But they let it be known that I killed it. You know what I mean? And they let me just be myself. And I think that I've been blessed with that. God gave me that. You know, I haven't necessarily done the work to deserve that, but I'm constantly so grateful. I think keeping the tribe around you that's going to take care of you, but also be real with you, hold you up, but also make sure that your feet are firmly planted. It's the intangible that can't be replaced, you know. And I would say to any artist who's finding their way, that could be your family. For some people, it's your friends. For some, you know what I mean? But find that and find the people that are brutally honest with you. Because at the end of the day, that's what's going to keep you honest with yourself. That's when, you don't want to have a distorted view of self or the world. So the people that can keep that clarity surrounding you is, I think, the most important. That's not just for musicians or artists. That's like a human thing. But as artists who are on this constant emotional roller coaster, that shit is so deeply valuable, for sure.
I want to add confirmation. I tried to drag him out last night to see Benji B, and he's like, I got to prep for my set on Sunday. So the man is true to his word.
Love, man.
You were on stage 2 tomorrow at what time?
I go on at 6:20 tomorrow.
6:20. You don't want to miss it. If you've never seen him live before, you don't want to miss it. So.
Appreciate you, man.
Sid Sriram.
Thank you. Before we finish, congratulations, man, on everything. This man's a legend, and it's an honor to have this conversation with you, brother. Love. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everybody.